Continuing education knows that at the end of the day, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we really listen to their needs, and we can offer them flexible options both within continuing education and across the campus.
We don't take a cookie-cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
This is CWA, and you've been here for a couple of days probably, but just a quick note. This is a safe environment to disagree, but disagree respectfully, so I was asked to remind everybody of that. And then one last note. We'll reserve the last 20 minutes or so, maybe longer, for audience questions. And again, if you've been here before, you know the routine. There will be people around, producers to take questions by note card. I will prioritize student questions today, so please indicate if you are a student. But I will try to collect as many questions as possible and give our really amazing panel of speakers today a chance to address all of those questions. So, I'm going to give a chance for all of our panelists to introduce themselves rather than me reading their bios. And so I will invite each one of you to introduce yourselves and then maybe give a quick intro about our topic today about feminist aesthetics and visual culture.
They keep sitting me next to the moderators, and so then I have to go first. So that's fine with me. Hi, my name is Kate Schatz, and I'm an author. A couple of my books are out there on the table. A number of them are sold out, which is lovely, but there's still some other ones. I'm an author. I write fiction and nonfiction, and all of my books have to do with lesser known or hidden histories, feminist histories, anti-racist and radical histories, all storytelling in service of us looking back at history in order to kind of understand our present moment and ideally to help us shape the kind of just, equitable future that we all deserve. I come to you from the Bay Area, California, and I'm excited to talk about this. I've been talking about feminist stuff my entire life, so I think for me in the title, Pretty Palatable or Political, the most interesting word to me in that title is or, because it assumes that there's some kind of a choice or that these are mutually exclusive things. So I'm excited to kind of dig into that. It's not an and or, it's not like comma, 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 it's or. So I have plenty to say about all that.
Yeah, I've come in from Bangalore in India. It's a long journey. I'm an artist, writer, and curator, and my work is strongly feminist and also interrogates the idea of the nation. I create large sort of bodies of work. I call them projects, which has sometimes 50 or 100 sort of objects in it. So it's also about archiving and digging into the archive and finding sort of images. And I use layers of quotations and references in my work. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today. We didn't know what it was about, so we just had a little conversation in the coffee room. So I think, I'd like to be quite anecdotal because, by the way, I'm a sculptor as well as I do performance. So I do photo and video performance and also live performance. So my work deals a lot with the image of women, and I use women's stories and art history as well as different kinds of disciplines and popular culture as well.
Hi, I'm Cynthia James, and excited to be here and to be on this panel. This is my first time at this conference, and it's been awesome. I love the blend of collaboration and the students being so involved in what happens on these panels and the topics. This topic is interesting for me because I've had a varied life. I'm I'm a speaker. I am a TEDx speaker. I'm award-winning author of 6 books, and I do emotional integration coaching. But I've had a varied life and a varied career that this topic impacts. I've been a model, I've been an actress, and I've been in corporate America. And what I believe is that there is a very, sometimes silent, expectation that the feminine is supposed to fit. It's really nice to be pretty. It's really nice to be palatable, but don't get too political. And so I have a podcast called Women Awakening, and I've interviewed like 285 women around the world who are change makers, and they deal with this topic in varying degrees. And so I'm interested to be on this panel and have this conversation.
I'm not sure why I'm here. Might notice I'm the odd man out, so to speak. Well, I was a student here, so I did my undergrad here, and this reminds me a bit of, I took Intro to Women's Studies, and there were 100 people in the class, and 5 of us, there were 5 men, and none of us knew each other. By the end of the first week, we were all huddled in the back together as a cluster, so hopefully I can stay out of trouble today. But I love this topic, and I can't wait to hear it's a lot of varied perspectives that you'll get today, so I'm looking forward to learning from that myself. I think the closest I would probably come to the topic would be on the matter of physical attractiveness. So some of my research deals with dating and romantic attraction, and one of the questions that we might talk about during the course of the day is, why is it such a big deal? Right? Why is physical attractiveness such a big deal for anybody, and particularly for women, and how does it play out? Let me just share this real quick. If you ask people what they want in a romantic partner, okay, they'll tell you what they think they should say. They say, I want someone with good character, I want someone who's kind. Yeah, sure you do. Now, with speed dating studies and huge online dating studies, now we can actually see, when the rubber hits the road, what do you actually prioritize, right, when you choose a partner? And inevitably, and I found across cultures, in the top 3 traits that people want is physical attractiveness, right? No surprise. It's number 1 for heterosexual men and gay men. It's number 3 for heterosexual women and lesbian women, okay? So there's motivation to present yourself in the most palatable way possible, or prettiest way possible, I suppose. Whether that's good or bad, we can talk about that. One last thing I'll say about this is there's a really interesting study of Hinge users. Hinge is an online dating platform, 450,000 plus users. And there was a throwaway research question they had. I thought it was the most interesting question in the study. They said, how long do people spend on a profile before they swipe left, get rid of them, or swipe right, say I'd be interested? It was less than 2 seconds. Well, I think it was 1.7, if I remember correctly. Now, what can you see in a user interface for an online dating app in 1.7 seconds? The picture, right? And it's not preference. That's a hard rule out on whether you will ever meet that person, right? Or that you might have the probability. So the stakes of this, I think, are high. And how we handle that pressure as humans, I think, is really interesting.
Wait, can I just quickly ask Ty a question? What was number 1 for lesbians?
Number 1 for lesbians?
Like what?
Socioeconomic status.
I mean, my wife does work in tech, so.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay, that tracks. Thank you. Okay, let's move on.
What about for heterosexual women?
Heterosexual women, socioeconomic status first, kindness second.
Okay.
But then, then the looks. They like the strong jaw. They like the V-shaped body. All the tropes of looks maxing. They're into.
My students are laughing because they actually just recently taught me what looks maxing is. And so, again, thank you for priming me for this. Who knew that that was going to be part of my immediate future? So thank you, Ty, for also mentioning that. Sorry?
Explain it. Now you have to explain.
Oh, no. I'll invite Ty to explain it.
Yeah, this is
I'm
maybe
just
the one thing I can speak with expertise on. Not that I'm trying to do it, but just because I'm a man. But so looks maxing is this idea of trying to maximize your physical appearance, but in a way that is, I would say as a psychologist, highly compulsive. To the extent, this is one of my favorite techniques, is there's this guy, Mike Mew, who's a now discredited dentist or oral surgeon, encouraging men online to break their jaw with hammers so they can reshape their jaw into a stronger jawline.
Ew.
Yeah.
I just did the mewing gesture, and the young people laughed. I should also say I'm a parent, so I have a 16-year-old and two 13-year-olds in my house, so I understand your language, unfortunately.
All right, maybe we'll come back to looks maxing, but if I may digress. So, as Kate mentioned, the title of this panel gives us three options, and maybe it shouldn't be or, but it's pretty palatable, maybe and or political. But when I was thinking about this earlier today, it struck me that all of those options are going to vary depending upon who you ask, what century, what decade you're asking these questions, what country you're asking these questions in. And I think that obviously visual culture is very culturally and historically and time dependent, right? And I think what's great about this panel is that we have people who have been thinking about visual culture and art and feminism from a variety of perspectives, right? We have an artist, we have a psychologist, we have somebody from literature and leadership studies. And so with that in mind, my opening question for all of you, I'm not going to direct it to any particular person, is does making feminist ideas aesthetically pleasing or aesthetically palatable, for lack of a better word, expand feminist messaging? Does it expand the reach of feminist messaging, or does it actually water it down? And the corollary to that is there a version of feminism that's become so Instagram friendly or friendly to the internet, that it's actually lost something that is actually very essential to the feminist movement?
I can go first, but I'm not going to go first every time.
Okay.
Because that just gets boring, you know. And so I do have an answer. I have a lot of answers to that, but to the question of, does it kind of expand or kind of dilute the message to make it palatable? I think it actually, I am someone who believes that kind of any way that we get these messages out is powerful. I think it takes all kinds. I believe in multiple tactics, and I believe in appealing to multiple audiences in multiple ways. And what I can speak to specifically about this is, I wrote a book series known as the Rad Women book series. So the first book, and it is called Rad American Women A to Z. It's an illustrated children's book that's a ABC book, and each letter of the alphabet tells you a short story about a different woman from American history. And it has a focus on women of color and marginalized women, right? So A is for Angela Davis. So, and the very first sentence of the book tells you that Angela Davis grew up in a neighborhood in Birmingham, Alabama, where the KKK used to bomb the houses there so much that it was known as Dynamite Hill. So it's not Frog and Toad, our friends, right? It's not your average children's book. And the illustrator and I were extremely, and I don't have it with me, I have some of the other, I borrowed this from the bookseller. This is another one of the books in the series featuring Malala, our keynote for tonight. But on the cover of Rad American Women, we very intentionally wanted to, and my illustrator wanted to have all the women really showing different facial expressions. And we wanted some of them, so it's kind of a grid of faces, and some of them are smiling. Patti Smith is on the cover, and she's like, screaming into a microphone like a rock star. But we've got radical feminists who are smiling and looking really happy and showing joy. We have people looking serious, but we really intentionally wanted to show a wide range of emotion, right? Because, and also we really intentionally used really, really bright colors, Throughout, there's illustrations, there's colors. We wanted to make this book, this series of books, look as cool and inviting as possible, because we want to invite readers in to encounter topics and ideas that otherwise they might not want to encounter, right? So I think strategically, I've always used aesthetics, and I mean, look, don't judge a book by its cover is one of the dumbest sayings ever. Literally, how do you judge a book? By its cover, right? Covers of books do everything. They tell us, they tell us what the book is, what the vibe is. So I'm really intentional with my book covers that sometimes I think of my books as like, feminist Trojan horses. Like, I'm getting all kinds of radical messages in there, and I'm doing it with bright colors and fun illustrations and also just really good storytelling. And I don't think in any way it dilutes it, right? But it's just another strategy. I know for a fact that I've been able to communicate stories of women that hundreds of thousands of kids otherwise wouldn't have gotten to access, because I've put them in these books that look really fun. And none of them have been banned yet. And I very much believe that that's for two reasons. One, the people that ban books don't actually read books, right? If they read any of these books, they would ban them in a hot second. They all have trans women in them. Again, one of them starts with Angela Davis. They focus on stories of women of color and marginalized women. The other reason is that I look like this. I don't look like a bannable author. I am a relatively aesthetically pleasing white woman. I have blonde hair, right? If we're going to talk about being pretty, I meet the basics of a Western white woman beauty standard. Now, I'm like, I'm getting older. I look in the mirror. I'm like, wow, things are changing. But I have a face that gets me a certain degree of privilege. So I'm also interested to talk on how beauty and looks can also be used as a leverage. Like, I leverage that to be able to write these books that people don't think are going to be radical because of the way that I look.
Well, I will, is it okay? Okay. So, from my perspective, feminism came to the forefront to invite women into equality and equanimity, to stand in their power, to bring their voices, to bring their presence. And we do live in a culture that focuses on beauty. When I was a model in New York, it was all about magazine covers. It was all about some commercials. But as evolution has occurred, you see celebrities that spend thousands of dollars for people to dress them and make up, and then young people try to follow them. So pretty is subjective, and I think it's why some people are really struggling that have different lifestyles or different choices because they don't fit into that box that says this is pretty. And then you get online and they get trolled or attacked for not being pretty. And then the palatable part is, are you doing everything to make people comfortable? And if you are not, then there's something wrong with you, and then that brings up blame, and that brings up shame. So when I was in Hollywood, it was like, you're supposed to look pretty, but if you're a background player, don't look too pretty because you don't want to look better than the star. And you want to be palatable because you want to get hired again. So you don't want to bring politics into the workforce. Then, when I get in corporate America, same thing. It's like, but you dress different than if you're in Hollywood, right? And so there's a way you carry yourself, and there's a way you bring your energy and your essence. And the palatable part is, everything you say and do has got to make the system comfortable and the clients comfortable. And don't get too political. So here you are, if you are in a space where you want to be strong in your feminine energy, then why can't you be all three? Why can't you have an opinion? Why can't you have thoughts? Why can't you bring your energy? And pretty, eye of the beholder, I can't draw worth a darn, so I dress myself. That's my artistry. But, you know, I can look out there and some of you people will be like, no, I am not wearing animal, not happening. So I just think that it's really, why can't you bring your pretty the way it fits for you?
Thank you. Anybody else want to delve into the question of whether making feminism aesthetically pleasing either, dilutes the message or not?
I just might like to follow up on Cynthia's point, which I really enjoyed, which is the idea of why can't you be whatever you want to be, right? Why can't you be a complex, multifaceted kind of person? And maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's the fullest realization of what this is supposed to be. I have to admit that I get confused all the time. I think that's probably a good thing. There was just happened a little while ago. I was talking to one of my friends. She's about a 25-year-old woman, and I called her a girl on accident, which, back when I was in school, that would get you in a lot of trouble for sure, and that's fair, instead of calling her a woman, right? Giving the respect deserved. I blushed. I was embarrassed. And I said, I'm sorry, I meant to say woman. And she just looked me dead in the eye. She says, I have more important shit to worry about. Not very palatable in the traditional sense. And look, I understand that if you are a strong woman like that and you're just speaking your mind and being a badass in the world, that there will be pushback against that. But I think there are far more people now who are just ready for that, That makes me want to run through a wall. I'm so fired up by that kind of attitude. So I hope that's a change. I hope that's a change that's been happening, that it doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be palatable. If that's what you want, awesome. But you can also be badass, And I think there's a growing segment of men who really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, so I want to go off on a slightly different track and talk about the history of feminism slightly. In the 70s, we became, when we were kind of college students, we became very stout feminists and all that when reading all the literature. But many decades later, in the 90s, I met Kate Millett, who was one of our icons, in Bangalore, because a friend of mine happened to know her from New York, and she'd invite, she is an artist, by the way, Kate Millett. So she'd come to Bangalore, and she had a show in my friend's place, actually. And then she took us both out for dinner, and then she was saying, Pushpa's an artist, and she does feminist work. So she said, show me your work, and I had a little brochure I brought along. And actually, that was my first photo performance work, where I play this Zorro-like character wearing very short shorts, and then I have this adventure on the, streets of Bombay. It's a kind of like a detective story. So when she saw it, she got furious, because this early kind of feminism was very puritanical. So it was all about the body, which we find very essentialist. So it was about the female body, and it was about the female sort of, experience, and as being different from the male experience, and against all this, anything attractive maybe, So this was very light-hearted and fun, and, but about this kind of, this woman alone in this city, big bad city, and having an adventure. So that was, I just wanted to bring it up because feminism itself, changes with time. And in fact, after that, I found that Madonna had become a big, internationally, but Madonna had become a big sort of feminist cult figure, with her kind of very overt sexuality and all that, which earlier the feminists would have completely rejected and said, you have to hide the sexuality, and you have to be, you cannot just be so decorative or so overtly sexual and so on.
Thank you, everybody. So my next question was me trying to guess what those that organized this panel, the kind of what they were trying to sort of elicit out of our speakers. So I don't know if I guessed right, but here was my guess. I think the panel was designed to explore potentially the tension between authenticity and ambiguity. And I think, and these themes have been explored in some other panels that I've attended this week, some of them that these speakers have been on. I think in this digital world, we're caught between, especially women, but men too, but I think especially women are kind of caught between this desire, also demand to be our authentic selves, right? But at the same time, we exist in so many spaces. We have our professional lives, we have our family lives, we have our political lives potentially, and we have real lives and digital lives. And that opens up spaces to be different, to reinvent ourselves, to be ambiguous potentially, if we want. And there might be power in being ambiguous. And so my question is, again, I will open up to whomever wants to answer. How do you, from your different lenses as an artist or as a psychologist, how do you think about this tension between ambiguity and authenticity?
Well, actually, in my work, I reject authenticity in the sense that there's no one real truth in general. And so I think we can be different kinds of people. And we can do different kinds of things. We don't have to be, one kind of, fixed thing, So in fact, in all my performance work, I just explore how many people you can be, and in a sense, like, I'd written long ago that I want to get into the skin of another person. So one of the ways of, what is interesting about play acting or enactment is that you get into the skin of that person different from you, and hopefully you learn something, and both can be authentic or not authentic.
For me, authenticity is just showing up. It's being present. It's, we're valuable because we exist, because we're here. We, our strength and our power is not defined by how we look. I feel like if you can stand in your own power and your own presence, whatever that looks like, then, that could show up as resilience and it could show up as creativity, but it always evolves as showing up authentically as you. And that's the good news and the interesting news, because everybody won't love it. But the thing about it, if you are not doing that, then you are, from my perspective, out of integrity with your soul, with your essence, with your reason for being. And so trying to fit in does not work. Be who you are and attract the same.
I absolutely agree on all of those things. And I would also say, on this idea of the tension, it is interesting that we are in this time where this idea of being your authentic self is kind of a buzz phrase, and that we also live in very unreal times, right? And especially when, how many times have I said to myself, my friends, and my kids, the internet is not real life. Social media is not real life, right? But we also, we can't get through this panel and this conversation without talking about Mar-a-Lago face, right? And what we see in terms of this current regime, and the actual aesthetics, right? And it's, there's obviously, tensions within feminism that can we both advocate for women to look however they want and to have any kind of look they want, and yes, I'm wearing makeup, right? We can dress nice, we can be sexy, we can be all these things, and then can we also critique the incredible use of, the current aesthetic look that these women who are under the Trump regime all have, right? Which is what I mean by the Mar-a-Lago face, right? Which is the lip fillers, the cheek fillers, the really particular contouring makeup, the hair extensions. I mean, you look at the pictures of Kristi Noem over the years and you can see her transformation, you can see all of them. Then you look at her husband and his fetish online. I mean, it's all connected, right? And I would say on the one hand, those women all have the absolute right to look however they want, but we also need to recognize that aesthetic in particular, it's part of a visual aesthetic of like white Christian nationalism, which I feel like I've mentioned white Christian nationalism on every panel I've been on, and I'm just going to keep talking about it. But it's a dog whistle. It is part of the visual landscape of that movement, and it's a way to signify, I am part of this, I am you, right? I mean, it's also, and that, I think that attention to visual culture and how it intersects with politics is so important, right? Because all of these movements, I mean, if you, like the white nationalists, white supremacists, neo-Nazis online have massive networks of different symbols, whether they're numerical or different images that they use to signal to each other what they're doing, right? It's really complex. There's huge systems of that. That's how they get away. And then they have separate systems for how they indicate online, right? The way that people get around censors and the way that language has shifted online, right? This is all part of like a visual and aesthetic culture. Even when Greg Bovino was out there in his like Nazi trench coat in Minnesota, we're not being paranoid or overreacting when we're noting these things. So again, I think it's thinking about, yes, we can be anyone we want, but also we can criticize a very specific visual moment that we're having.
And actually, that's a really good segue into one of our student questions, because they asked exactly about that. So the question is, Trump's administration is full of, what did you call it, Mar-a-Lago face, or Mar-a-Lago women? But most of them have actually been fired recently. Again, we can open, I don't want to just always defer to the person right next to me, but do you think there's any connection between the aesthetics of that particular woman in the Trump administration and the fact that they have all recently found themselves jobless?
Yes. I think that because they're disposable, right? I think it's part of a system of making everybody look the same so that you are interchangeable. And I think, again, it's almost fascinating that we still get surprised by him, because he's been showing us who he is for his entire career, for decades, right? And a big part of his way he moves through this world and creates and generates power and violence is through the interchangeable women. He wants them all to look the same, and then it is easier to harm them, and it is easier to dispose of them. So those women who did all of that work to get in those positions of power, which were never positions of power to begin with, I'll just say that stuff is really expensive to keep up. And I don't know if it's actually I'm sure they're getting a lot of money to help them look that way, but that's a lot of maintenance that they're gonna have to do now that they don't have jobs.
Yeah, well, I want to agree with you, but I also want to say that it just shows the level of disrespect for the feminine. Because I can put you in this position, but I can take you out just as quickly. And if you sell your soul to me, you can stay for longer. But if you don't, either way, you're going to get thrown under the bus, because it's not about your qualifications and the gifts that you bring and your brilliance, and by the way, I'm very clear they wouldn't hire me because I don't look like that. And but what I think is important is that trying to look like something that you are not to be accepted is just a recipe for your own inner disaster.
All right, thank you very much. So I'm going to ask one more question of mine, and then I will turn all of my attention to these many note cards that I have in front of me. So I'm going to ask a question from a very political science perspective. So do with it what you will. But as a political scientist, one thing that I study is feminists, is social movements, and then specifically the feminist social movement. And one of the lenses that we use to try to understand social movements is insider strategies versus outsider strategies. And of course, what that means is, do you work within institutions to try to change them as a person that is part of a social movement, whether it's feminism or some other social movement, or are you an agitator from the outside? And so how would you, again, apply that sort of insider-outsider strategy to aesthetics and to appearances? Is a feminism that is palatable to mainstream culture an insider strategy? Or are there ways in which you can leverage appearance and aesthetics to do more outsider agitation?
What immediately comes to mind, I mean, look, we can look at every female political leader or candidate in this country for decades, century, and we can look at how they've been talked about in terms of their physical appearance, right? It is inescapable. Look at Eleanor Roosevelt. How much attention was given to just her physical, she's so tall, she's awkward looking, she's manly. I mean, it's horrific when you look at what was actually written about her, her physical appearance, and it has not gone away. So I do think there's absolutely different strategies. There are women in positions of political power who are working absolutely, outside of that, and are not, and then there's women who are working inside of it. So I think a great example is AOC. AOC is someone who is very conventionally beautiful. Her makeup is always on point, right? And she uses the language and the visual culture of the internet to connect with voters and to connect with young people. I think she's really, really skilled at doing that, and I think she's a great example of how she can connect with a generation and can use, again, those kind of methods, can use her makeup, can use her style to bring, I think, very powerful and radical political ideas kind of into the center. And then you have someone, look, I'm from California, where we're having a disaster of a governor's race. And I absolutely believe that someone like Katie Porter, who is a brilliant politician and a brilliant political strategist, I absolutely believe she does not cater to this. She is not going to go out and try to look like AOC, right? She also just physically does not. And I absolutely believe that's a big part of why she's been ignored by the press and why she's been attacked. Yeah, she's not beautiful in the way that people want her to be. She's absolutely brilliant. And I think that she should be polling far better in my incredibly currently embarrassing state. So I think, again, we could have this conversation about everyone. And the thing is, we don't ever have those conversations about men. Look at you could look at a slob like Steve Bannon, who can just be like freaking Jabba the Hutt out there. And sorry, that's mean, but it's true. But even someone like a J.B. Pritzker, right, who's an incredible, it doesn't matter for men and I do think we're still in a moment where it is inescapable for women in positions of power in politics, and they have to make a conscious decision of how they're going to play it.
Anybody else want to take a stab at that?
Well, in India, in politics, you're specifically talking about politics, right? Yeah. So there's been this grand tradition, it was Gandhi who brought in Indian women into the public sphere during the nationalist movement. So a lot of women, highly talented, extremely intelligent women, entered the politics and the public sphere, and several of them became very, very kind of powerful and heads of institutions, or they were universities, institutions, and also in the government. So there's a certain aesthetics, we sort of make fun of it because we are another generation. So it came out of the movement what had happened during colonial times was that the British had destroyed the textile industries which were very famous and age-old, in India and South Asia. So part of the Indian independence movement was to actually encourage handloom textile. Weaving and handloom. So all these women were always dressed in these handloom saris, that was the aesthetic. And sari is not, what we wear today is not exactly the traditional sari, because every community has its own way of, it's just a drape, different way of draping. So people think when you wear a sari that it's a very traditional, but actually it was invented in the beginning of the 20th century by one of Rabindranath Tagore's aunts or sisters or something like that, who invented the modern drape. So it's like, say, Coco Chanel, reinventing the dress. It's around the same time, so that became the modern sari. So even now, actually, the sari is, people wear different kinds of clothes, but the sari is taken as formal dress. So you'll find mainly politicians. In fact, one politician, I think she was an actress or something like that, got elected to the parliament, and I think she went on the first day wearing some other dress, though it was a formal dress. So everyone criticized her, in the press, saying, "Oh, she's not wearing a sari" and all that. So there are, there on the one hand, we have this kind of Hindu fundamentalist kind of party ruling the country. So they have all these rules and regulations for women, apparently. So they have their own, women sort of politicians, but there are also politicians from other opposition parties who also wear this, traditional saris because there's so many different kinds of weaves. So it's a kind of, if you come from Bengal, you might really prefer to wear, as a kind of statement, Bengal weaves. Or if you come from, say, my state, you might wear, saris made from that particular region and so on. So they're highly articulate women, And all wearing these handloom saris, but on different sides of the, board, and being very articulate, and again coming on TV, and raising fantastic sort of questions in the parliament, and some of them are so famous, like they speak for 1 hour, when they're given a chance, and really kind of hard-hitting, kind of well-researched sort of stuff. So it's like, on the one hand, you're playing that thing of the typical or ideal Indian woman, wearing this handloom sari or a handloom cotton or silk sari and the kumkum and whatever, if you're a Hindu and so on. But you're also being this very kind of extremely modern, articulate, woke sort of woman,
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said that, because I do think that the non-Western or like the international perspective is really important, because obviously beauty standards vary by time and by culture. And when that intersects with politics and power, then that becomes even more, I think, amplified, especially in like a digital space, where politics and social media interact. So with that in mind, there was a question, and I'm going to start now turning it over to all of these very good questions. So the first one actually is a little bit related to what you were just talking about. So the comment is, we have pretty, palatable, or political. Where does power come in?
Woohoo. Yeah.
We're all powerful. It's just accessing it. It's not being afraid of it. I wrote a book called Does My Voice Matter? And it was really about my own journey through the decades of my life, and what culture was doing and the impact it was having on me and my choices, and where I would pull my own power back to be liked, or to be validated, or to feel valuable. I think the narrative will not change until people can absolutely tap into their own inner power and find their voices, to bring them out. You don't have to be a rabble-rouser activist to bring power into a space. You can bring it in just by, what do you value? What's important to you? How do you want to show up on the planet, and not being afraid to take a stand when something is unacceptable? But I think that a lot of people pull back their power for fear of being punished or diminished or abandoned. And I think we have to stop it because it is not supporting the health and well-being of the culture we live in today or the legacy of our children.
I find that to be a very interesting question. This is just an anecdote, but in New York, I'm up pretty early because I'm older, I guess, but I'll be up at like 7 o'clock at the coffee shop, and you can watch everyone filtering into work, walk into the subway. I'll tell you this, no men pass by before 8 o'clock. Everyone who walks by on their way to the subway to get into work is a young woman, you know. And I just sit there and I think to myself, that's pretty telling to me, what's happening there. I think there's this kind of quieter form that I anecdotally see taking place, where, you know, men, we can think we know more than we do, right? We can think we're better than we actually are. We are certainly prone to this, more so. I know, I'm preaching the choir here, probably. It's a really foolish way to go about things. It's a really foolish way if you actually want to make real progress and make real change and achieve real things. And what I see happening among many of the women that are in my orbit and my circles is they are not as susceptible at all to that. I think they see things as they are. I think they're more honest with themselves about their strengths and their weaknesses. And as a result, I think one of the things I've observed is they are quietly and powerfully moving to a far more powerful place. I think that's what a lot of men are so scared about right now, right? Even though through the ignorance, they're pretending like they're confident and so forth, they can see they're getting past, you know? And I think that's pretty exciting, actually. I think it's pretty exciting, yeah.
I would say there's a lot of violent fallback, you know, because the kind of violence unleashed on women, you know, not only murder, not only rape and murder, but you cut that woman into bits and put her into a suitcase. Recently, this has been happening several times, you know. It's really not funny. It's very scary, actually. It's so male chauvinistic that, I mean, even in general, like, okay, we're fighting all the time, like, you know. I mean, if there was a man of my experience and whatever, you know, reputation, they would be treated much more with much more respect than I am. But that's at one level, like, you know. But the kind of violence, it's you know, extreme violence, you know. And that's because of this fear of modernity, of this freedom of women. Suddenly there's this whole thing, like at one point, you know, Indians love the cell phone. So everyone wants to have a cell phone, and everyone, I think, more or less has a cell phone. But there was this whole thing, like, you know, these village elders would say, no, women cannot have cell phone. Because they're so scared of that kind of mobility that comes with it, you know, that you can do anything with that. You can be in touch with anybody, you can run off with somebody, or, you know, you can have a love affair or something like that. So that whole thing of control, like, you know, I mean, it comes up for some time and dies down, but it's very scary. Like the latest thing, as I said, is like this chopping up women and putting them in suitcases, you know, in trunks and throwing them somewhere, you know. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I just real quick, I don't disagree with that at all. I think that's very serious and very, very real, right? But it just shows how threatened men are by women's power, and how nervous some of these, you know, insecure, unstable men are, and threatened by the strength and the power that women are gaining. And you know, so it is serious. But I also think there's encouraging and like an uplifting side to it as well, in that women are gaining in power and they are becoming stronger and do have a different place now.
And well, what I would add to kind of bring that together too is that the problem is that when many men feel threatened, they react with violence. right? So yes, we have, that is kind of part of the pushback, right? And I think one of the ways we measure the success of any kind of movement or progress is by the amount of pushback that it gets, right? And so I think that's, and maybe those women are all headed to the subway early because there's less men at that time and they feel safer on the streets and on the subway. If I looked around and saw, ooh, it's mostly women at this time on the subway, like that's the train I'm taking. I wanted to say, just to get back to the question too, this idea of where does power play into it. I think all of these things, right, beauty and palatability and kind of political acuity or perspective, they can all be used to like access power, right? They can all absolutely be like ways to get power. And I would just say, I think it's important to remember that proximity to power is not the same as power. Right, and again, to go back to the Mar-a-Lago ladies and these kind of women who become the kind of spokespeople for this far-right fascist movement, that's not power, right? That's proximity to power. And so you can use your beauty, you can use these skills, you can use your palatability to get very close to power and to get into those spaces, but you're not actually accessing real power until you are, I think, in your authentic self and in your actual power, right? Which is not always going to get you right into those places of power, to go back to your idea about inside versus outside strategies. So, it's a constant negotiation, and again, it's going to look different for everybody depending on how you want to approach. But we can't be fooled into thinking that being near power is the same as actually having it.
Very kind of a similar question about power that has come up, that is actually, if I had been in the audience, I might have written this question. So whoever wrote this question, good job, you're in my head.
I hope it's one of your students.
I think it might be one of my students. Do you see ways in which feminism, or the language and aesthetics of feminism, is co-opted by political messages? And I guess the reason that I like this question is because it's something that I've been grappling with, not only as an academic, but also as a woman and as a feminist in this space. Like, how does the language of women's empowerment often get co-opted by people in power? And the last sort of part of this question is if so, is that always a bad thing?
How to, it's not only the language, like one of the things that have been promised by different governments and they never went through with it in India is to give 30% reservation for women in the parliament, which is actually quite a radical thing. And though it might sort of lead to some problems because they may not find 30% of women, but, but what's happening now is that they're trying to introduce some very problematic laws, and almost changing. It's called delimitation, where they want to redraw the parliamentary constituencies, which is very controversial. So what they're doing is they're introducing both laws simultaneously to confuse all the political parties, because it's as if both of them will be debated simultaneously, and this is as if it's along with this, this, if you oppose this, then this won't happen, or if this happens, this will also happen. It's very strange, because you're just using this. It's in fact, like, it's been going on for so long that they haven't done it, though they've been promising it, this women's reservation. They suddenly brought it in now, like yesterday. And these debates are going on. And again, this sometimes you'll find these extreme right-wing parties giving more seats to women than left-wing parties, or centrist parties. So, but they're almost like fronts, and kind of, they're not real leaders or something who are being put up. They're like sort of fronts, just to say that you have more women's representation or something like that.
I think there are some brilliant marketing people out there who take something that feels like an empowerment of a part of the population and then flips it to feed into the fear spaces within the culture as this is a bad thing. This will not serve you. This is going to make you so scared that you get violent. I mean, I think that the whole DEI thing is just fascinating to me. Because all of a sudden, all the work that was done for people to rise, to be empowered, and to be in power is now marketed as this horrible thing that needs to be dismantled. I'm on a board of the Global Livingston Institute, which takes students to Rwanda and Uganda. And we partner with other students there, and they travel together. And the first time I went, I was fascinated. I mean, there's all kinds of feelings about the leadership in Rwanda, but a huge amount of the leadership in the government is women. And there is this feeling that they want that form of collaboration. They want that innovative spirit. They want that nurturing spirit to talk about how do you lift up this country, instead of we don't want them there because we're afraid of what they might do. And I think that that's what's being called for in this country, is to wake up and understand the extraordinary contributions of the feminine and how it, I just don't think that we would be running around the world bombing everybody when there are children there.
And I would just add that, I mean, I think that the kind of corporate theft of feminist ideas or phrases is, I mean, we've been seeing that for years, and I totally agree. When a movement starts to work, and there's all this groundwork that's been going in, and all these theories, and all these years, right? And then once it's this is always the danger of bringing ideas into the mainstream, right? Because you lose control of the message, and then what happens is the language gets co-opted, and it gets used against you to vilify you, right? Like DEI, right? Or the idea of being woke, or critical race theory, which is suddenly just like they scrape the language off the top and turn it against you and completely take it out of its context. Or I think that happens, or it gets scraped and it gets completely decontextualized and used in like corporate marketing, right? I mean, it's like one of the reasons that the Barbie movie was so good, because I think Greta Gerwig actually did a really brilliant critique of the complexity of Barbie, right? Because there is the backfiring or the flip side of the kind of girl empowerment movement is like, go girl, you can do anything, but like, don't get murdered, or like, but you can't have an abortion, and it's like, right? It's like there's an emptiness to a lot of the messaging around all these things that girls and women can do, because if we're not talking about what girls and women are actually up against, and what the role that men and boys play in that, then it's, then it's empty. But it does sell products.
Thank you so much. If I can just real fast, linger a little bit on something that Pushpa and Cynthia said, when they mentioned Indian politics and Rwandan politics. This is something that I think American audiences need to understand about the politics of other countries. They have things called gender quotas. And I know that's like a completely radical thing from an American perspective, and they also have multiple parties. And I'm not necessarily saying that Indian politics and Rwandan politics are always nice, unicorns and rainbows, not by any stretch of the imagination. But they have something that does at least give women and other marginalized people the opportunity to participate meaningfully, which is gender quotas at the political and legislative level, and multiple parties rather than just two choices. And I think that we in this country would do well to think about some of those solutions. So that's my political science soapbox. So we are going to quickly run out of time, but there's a lot of questions up here about different intersections of what it means to be a woman and a feminist. And so there's a question about age first. How do you deal with aging and how that changes your own aesthetic, as well as how the world responds to you as we women age?
Oh, I'm so happy to talk about this. Irrelevant. I am 77 years old, and don't tell me I don't look good. I mean, take care of yourself. Exercise, eat well, meditate, do whatever you need to do to take care of it. You don't take care of the body, apathy comes in. Your body just stops functioning. The concept that you're too old, I take people to Egypt and climb inside the pyramids. I mean, it's like whoever made up that nonsense about aging, oh, please take a vacation. I mean, you can do with your life what you want. I mean, there are people in their 70s and 80s. I mean, my husband is a photographer, and he shot Jane Goodall as she was getting ready to go back again to Africa in her 90s. You know what I'm saying? It's an illusion that we do not have to buy into.
Yeah, I would just you look wonderful, I just want to say. And, aging's a trip, but I'd say the way that it intersects in terms of feminism is, it's great. Like, I don't give a fuck, excuse me, but I don't. The correlation with aging and fucks given is more I've been like this my whole life, but I definitely was a lot more invested in palatability when I was a younger person. I definitely, I think I've always been an outspoken person, but I cared more about being palatable, and all of that. I think I'm still polite and respectful when appropriate, but yeah, I care a lot less about that kind of pleasing, and it's very nice.
So similar to the age question, but a slightly different angle. The question is, women of color and women from marginalized communities will face additional challenges, especially when confronted with this idea of the ideal woman. What advice do you all have for women of color trying to make a difference in their communities?
Do it. I am not ignorant to the fact that racism exists, and it's in our structures, and in our culture, and in our communities. But change makers move forward. They don't dwell in the past. I feel like until the day I leave this planet, I want to be innovative. I want to be a change maker. I want to empower other people and other women. And there's nothing stopping me except me if I don't move. And so as a woman of color, I've had doors slammed. I've had people tell me, well, we don't do that here. And for me, that's just a message, not this door, not this place. But you're not going to stop me from bringing my voice, because that's why I'm on the planet. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
Well, in India, it's very racist as well, because there's this whole caste system, which is also based on skin color. Not that everybody is exactly that, but the ideal of Indian womanhood is supposed to be a fair-skinned woman, light browns, I would say, in this context. So there's a lot of, this thing of where people are insulted or they, because they're dark-skinned. And that's not respected enough, or the men and women alike. So, but the ideal of beauty is more, of course, on the woman. So there would be like awful trolling, maybe online or something like that against a politician or a public figure or something like that if they don't match that ideal of whatever good looks or prestige or something like that, and if they don't look like that.
So I actually had an interesting experience with this. I know we're talking about the impact on other women, but I'll say it can have a broader impact as well. And when we talk about the intersection of race and feminism. My grandma lived to be 104, which is awesome. And I got to spend a ton of time with her actually during the pandemic. And, my grandma just, to tell you the truth, she seemed very uptight when I was growing up. And she was always about dotting her I's and crossing her T's. And she just seemed very reserved. In her late 80s, she started to get a bit of dementia. And one of the things that you lose as you start to get dementia is you start to lose your impulse control. And that can be very challenging. I don't want to minimize that. For Grandma, it was a revelation. Without her impulse control, you know what went away? The social constrictions that went along with being a Japanese American woman for a woman of her generation. And what was revealed, my God, Grandma's a real smart ass, Grandma, by far the funniest person in the family. Talking trash at me, asking where my woman was, and it was, we all loved it so much. I know it was empowering to the cousins in my generation who were women, but I'll also say as her grandson, it was remarkably empowering too. And it was thought-provoking to think about the intersection of race, the kind of pressures that puts on somebody, cross that by era that somebody grew up in, and then the authentic self and who somebody really is. And I just thought that was such a blessing in disguise. And so it not only impacts other women, but it impacts our society when people are able to do that.
What was your grandma's name, Ty?
Grandma Mary.
Oh.
Yeah. Real sweetheart, and but no, not a sweetheart actually. Real tiger.
I love that. I just wanted to say, to kind of tie some of these ideas we've talked about together on this question, and I don't think this is too much of a downer, but Ty, you kind of talked earlier about this idea of you feeling that men are starting to realize that as women gain power, there's this anxiety and this kind of, this anxiousness. But I think there's a real direct corollary to when we talk about race, right? America is a multicultural and a multi-ethnic nation. Like, that's actually what it is. And like, when you talk, Cynthia, about like progress, we are moving forward. We are like, demographically, we are changing, right? And we are going to continue to change. Like, this is a multiracial, multi-ethnic country. And the increase of anxiety when it comes to, again, white Christian nationalism, and this fear, right? This is the great replacement theory, this fear that white people are getting replaced, right? This is a global theory that is underlying most of the totalitarian governments across the world, including our own, is this false notion that white people are getting replaced, right? This idea of a declining birth rate, all of these things. And so, I think it connects to the Mar-a-Lago face and this perpetuation of this particular beauty standard, because I think people are terrified that is going away, right? It is not going away, it is just changing, right? And I think, to your question of being a young person of color wanting to step into positions of power, I mean, it's an incredible time to do it. You are very needed, and you are part of a movement that is going to just continue. And there's going to be a lot of really panicked people in this last gasp of trying to hold on to a pretty crumbled, really toxic system of power and control, but it is changing.
And that's a great place, because we were just on time, so I think that's a really good space to end. Thank you to our panelists for a very enriching conversation. Even though we weren't sure what we were going to talk about, I think we did it well, right?